Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Career Chat. I'm Krista Harmon with the Kent Intermediate School District, and I'm a workforce development consultant there. And I'm delighted to have Special Agent Mara Schneider with us today. She is in the FBI, and she's going to share part of her journey with us today so we can help young people be educated about the process. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Well, we're glad. We have a question we'd like to ask here at the Career Chats. I'll really take you back to the high school age, Mara. When you were 15 or 16, did you think you grew up to be an FBI agent?
I definitely did not. When I was in high school, I thought I would end up being a lawyer. That was the career I dreamt about, and eventually becoming a judge. So that didn't end up being even what I went to school for initially. I applied for colleges in engineering, so I have a degree in chemical engineering, went to grad school for engineering, and then realized that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And then I went to law school. So I did eventually become a lawyer. It just took me a while. I was a practicing attorney for about 4 years before I joined the FBI. So couple of twists and turns from the time I graduated till the time to today.
Yeah, that's great. And, that's so important for young people to hear because, they feel like they have to have it figured out. And you're a great example that it evolves. So your original dreams were a lawyer and a judge. And tell us about what you were doing in high school to kind of explore that. Did you do job shadows at all? Did you do kind of conversations with people in those fields? Tell us what you were doing back then.
Sure. So at the time, I'm an Air Force brat, so my father was stationed overseas. And during the summers, I actually worked in the JAG offices at the air base in England where we were. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the military, that's basically the lawyers for the military. So I worked as a student intern there for I want to say 3 summers. I was there for quite a while, which I think is where I developed a passion for it. So they did both prosecution and defense in that office. And they handled civil lawsuits and that sort of thing as well. But I kind of grew up watching those folks work, and I found their work fascinating.
I love that you were proactive in that, and I think that's for young people to hear that sometimes we have to take a step to explore. And even being here today or watching this career chat is just a great example of that. So that was your initial thinking, but then things evolved. So tell us what kind of impacted that thinking that you shifted away from some of that, at least with the chemical engineering. I'm curious.
Yeah. So I think I was very good at science, and I still really love it. And I think when we're young, we have a tendency to listen to maybe sometimes too much what other people say to us, right? So one of the things my parents wanted to be sure I did going to college and then graduating was that I could get a job that I could support myself. And I knew engineering was a job that people were always hiring for. I was good at the science. I found it really, really interesting. And so I thought, why not? This is something that I could succeed at. But it turned out as I went for sort of further along in school, I should say I interned for a pharmaceutical company when I was in college. And what I learned from that experience was that if you wanted to be a person who did research at this company, you had to have an advanced degree. And so I signed up for grad school and then quickly realized that I didn't want to spend my life in a lab. So there's a part of my job, as part of my job as an agent, I work on our evidence response team. And so we're the people who go out if there's any forensic searches that have to be done related to a federal crime or a state crime. And so I still get to use that science. I'm just not using it in the same way. So I still love it. I still think I'm pretty good at it. It just didn't end up being what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
I think this is so important for young people to hear, that those natural interests that you have as a young person, and even some of the things that you're good at, they can come together in a way that you never would have thought, right? That you get to use that science in a non-lab position.
Yes.
So we're going to definitely dig in more to the evidence response team because that's something I'd love to learn about. So once you were done with college, tell us about that first transition right out of college. What was the first job you got, and how did you even get that job?
Oh goodness. So outside of my internships, I was in grad school for 4 years. And so my first job was as a graduate student. I was a lab assistant for an engineering professor. And then when I decided to leave grad school, I took a little break before I went to law school. And I did things that I gave me some time to really think about what I wanted to do with my future. I worked at a bookstore, which I also really loved, but wasn't a long-term plan. And then I actually worked on as a volunteer coordinator for a crisis line in Indianapolis. And so I was the person who trained people how to answer our crisis and suicide prevention lines. And loved that. So it was sort of directly dealing with people and dealing with people in crisis, which again was all great training for what I ended up doing. And then I applied to law school. And out of law school, I worked as a criminal defense attorney for 4 years before I joined the FBI.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's some of the wisdom as adults. We can look back and see how some of those early jobs gave us the skills, the little skills that we needed to do our future jobs. So young people, as you start your journey, know that you're learning things along the way. You're never going to waste them. They're all going to come together.
Yeah.
So you had this crisis phone line. Yeah, I absolutely love that. The bookstore, again, lots of reading, which is going to be in your job. So you went to law school. You became a criminal defense attorney, and you're doing that for 4 years. And then what shifted in your mind? What changed that you're thinking, a federal law enforcement might be the way to go? What were you thinking?
Right. So I met an old college friend at a wedding, is what happened. And he had joined the FBI right out of the Army. And he was talking about his job in New York, and he was on a squad that was investigating organized crime. So sort of those Italian mob families that you see in the movies, that's what he was doing for a job. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a fun job that would be. I had the background the FBI is looking for. We're always, we hire a lot of lawyers and accountants, a lot of folks from the military, former law enforcement officers, but also we're always looking for people with STEM backgrounds, right? So I had these sort of unique characteristics that I knew the Bureau would be interested in. And I thought, well, heck, why not, right? My husband likes to tell the story that I didn't tell him I was applying to the FBI until I had to go for an interview. And the interview was in Chicago, so I couldn't not tell him I had to go to Chicago. And he's like, why would you not just tell me? And I said, well, nobody gets this job, right? And so why would I tell you that I applied for a thing I wasn't going to get? And here I am 15 years later, and it is the most fun job I've ever had. So it worked out.
Yes, it did. We're going to definitely dig into the training and part of that process, the application process, because I do want young people to understand what it takes to do this. But why don't you start with helping us understand what an FBI agent does? And I know there's a lot of nuances there, but and maybe even address some of the myths as you go through that explanation.
Oh, sure. And, I wish it was a job where in an hour time, we could solve things from when a crime happens to when we figure it out, right? There's a joke about things being a federal, like don't make a federal crime out of it, or, don't make a federal issue out of it. Because they take a long, long time. So just for sort of globally, we have 56 field offices across the country. And so I happen to work in the FBI field office that covers the state of Michigan. And the FBI is tasked with investigating more than 300 different federal crimes. And that can range from anything from terrorism to a white collar crime. So that could be identity theft or a cyber crime. So we have a lot of things that we investigate. And our agents, we have about, let's say, 36,000 employees nationwide, and just under 14,000 of us are agents. So the vast majority of folks who work for the FBI don't carry a gun day to day. but we as agents are the primary investigators of those crimes. And so we're tasked with trying to identify who's responsible for having committed a crime, arresting them, and then assisting in the prosecution. So it's a lot of investigative work, like you would see on most of the cop shows on TV. They just tend to take a long time.
Yeah, I think that most people don't realize that it takes so much time. Like you say, it's not like quick fix, that it can go years.
It can take years. I worked a case. So I should also say Detroit is my second field office. I worked in New York City for about 7 years. And while I was there, I worked civil rights cases. So hate crimes and excessive force cases, things like that, and our crimes against children program. And then, I had a case that was a crimes against children case that took more than 18 months from the time I identified who was responsible to the time he was convicted of the crime. So it can take a long time. Lots of patience involved in this job.
Yeah, which leads me to some additional questions. You're dealing with some of the hardest subjects, like you just mentioned, the dark side of humanity, probably in a lot of ways. And I know young people want to know, like, how do you cope with that? How do you go home at night? Give us some of that thinking.
Yeah, so I think the Bureau has done a really good job over the course of my career here of making sure that we have time to take care of ourselves. And so some of that is structuring in gym time in our work week. And we have folks we can talk to. We are a goofy bunch of people sometimes, right? Like we like to have fun together, and that makes the job so much fun and bearable in some cases, right? You're working with the same people for very long hours over the course of weeks or months, and that can be a lot. I also have a really good role model at home. My husband's an oncologist, and so he deals with some heavy stuff as well. And he taught me over the course of years how to learn how to separate those things, right? Try to leave work as much as you can at work. And when you're home, to be home with my family. I've got kids. My parents live here, so I have a lot of folks around me who support me. And so that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because we need people to do that work. So it's great that you're able to find coping strategies to deal with that. Yeah. So a young person's watching this, for example, and they want to know, well, this sounds great. I like investigations. I like science. I like research, even the law. How does one get started? And I know that we can find this on the internet, but tell us about maybe the ins and outs of your process, and anything that you might want young people to know as kind of an inside tip.
Sure. So the process takes a while. Just like our investigations, the process can take some time. So it took me almost 2 years from the time I applied to the time I became an agent. So got a class at Quantico. And that process is long because they do a thorough background check of you. And that includes talking to your neighbors, your teachers, your former bosses, all of that. We have to take a physical fitness test. We have to be able to pass that. We take a polygraph, which is my least favorite part of this process, but an important one for all the folks that work here. We have a top secret clearance, and that requires a lot of responsibility. And so they want to be sure that they're not entrusting our nation's secrets with people who aren't trustworthy for that. So it can take some time. It took me, as I said, we had a hiring freeze of about 9 months in the middle of my process. So it again, patience, and just understanding that you could be waiting a while. What I will say, and what I often say to students when I speak to them, is that while you're going through this process of applying to the FBI, you want to be sure you're doing a job that you love. And making the choice to leave that job to join the Bureau should be a hard choice. So even for people who have all of their lives thought about being an FBI agent, while you're going to school and getting your first jobs, and make sure you're doing something that you enjoy, because it can take some time, and you don't want to be, if for whatever reason it doesn't work out on the back end, you want to be sure that you are in a career or in a position that you can do for years, right? You don't want to structure your education and your job choices based on what will get you into the Bureau. I think that's a hard way to go through this process.
Yeah, that's great mentor wisdom right there, Mara. I love that you shared that physical fitness is part of it. So young people need to know that ahead of time. It's not like you can decide, oh, I've got to run the 100-yard dash or 3-mile run if I've never trained.
Right.
And also for them to kind of be keeping their nose clean in high school. Because again, this background check goes back far. So
Yes.
what else would you like them to know? Have you seen young people who haven't gotten in because certain things have popped up that they could have prevented maybe if they knew this was a future goal?
Yes. So I think that the things that most often trip people up are, we have a pretty strict drug policy. And so that's something just to pay attention to as you're going through college and you're, experimenting. And we are not looking for perfect people. But there are, again, we are trusting you and with Bureau employees with a lot of sensitive information. And so we want to be sure we have the right folks in that job. So just paying attention to those things, right? And as we're, we're in an age where people live their lives on social media, just be mindful of the kinds of things that are going out there, because every employer, not just the FBI, will be looking at that stuff as well. And so I know this is incredibly old-fashioned because I'm not even sure we have newspapers anymore, but I was always told, don't put anything up there that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the newspaper, right? So kind of a similar thing, just to be mindful that if you wouldn't want your boss to see it, 5 or 10 years from now, maybe just don't put it up.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true for the FBI, but I know someone in law enforcement at the federal level, and they even do credit checks. Because again, if you don't have good credit, you're vulnerable to maybe corruption of being bribed or something. Is that the true for FBI?
That's very true. And so I think what we worry about for people who have the kind of access that we do as FBI employees is those weaknesses that could make us vulnerable to spies from other countries or to criminals who would use that information to bribe us or to force us into doing things. So, you just, smart choices when you're younger don't seem as important as they will become for you later, right? And so just learning about how to make more informed choices. And part of being here today is learning that, right? How would I make a choice that could land me a job in the FBI later on?
Yeah, I think this is a great outcome of today's career chat, Mara, is to help kids know what is going to be expected so they can make good choices now. Because there's nothing worse than something keeping them from their dream job because they just didn't know better.
Right.
So you had mentioned your fabulous background. The FBI must have just jumped at you when they saw your application come through. College education is a requirement. And obviously, again, kids can look this up, but what else is the kind of the core requirements?
Yeah, so to be an agent in particular, you need a bachelor's degree, a 4-year degree from somewhere. And it can be in almost anything, right? So, don't feel like law, accounting, those sorts of things are going to be what we're looking for. And then 2 to 3 years professional work experience. So if you think about something that would require you to wear a suit occasionally, right? So something that it's a little bit different now, I think, with COVID and so much more working from home, but something that, would like a typical office job, and I'm using quotation marks. But there are other positions in the Bureau that don't have those same requirements. So our intelligence analysts, those folks also do have bachelor's degrees, and so they would need those as well. But the work experience requirement looks a little bit different. We have forensic accountants, and so if accounting is your thing, you don't want to carry a weapon. We ask that those folks have or are eligible to be a CPA or a forensic examiner, a fraud examiner, I think is what they call them, CFE, certified fraud examiner. I am not an accountant, so don't quote me on that one. But so each job type may have a different educational or work experience requirement. So it runs the gamut. But typically with a bachelor's degree, you can't go wrong.
And I think that helps young people know that it can be in anything, really. It's that accomplishment is what they're looking for. Young people love to know what a typical day is like. What I know that there's probably not two that are the same, but when you think about typical FBI in those early part of those 15 years, what are you doing each day?
Yeah. Sure. So a large part of my job is responding. I'm sort of a reactive agent, right? And so a crime happens that our state or federal or state or local partners might think is a federal crime they would call. And so I end up doing, for many reasons, a lot of victim interviews. And so especially when I was working crimes against children, I was often at least the interviewing agent or the second person in that interview. And so that can be minutes, it can be hours. And so it's responding to those things. We sometimes will have early morning arrests or search warrants. And so sometimes the day starts at 5 o'clock when we're meeting to brief those. And then some days, it's 8 to 5. Sometimes we get after hours calls because somebody's been picked up or we've identified a victim that we need to go speak to. So there really is no typical day. It can depend on what kinds of crimes you're investigating. So our folks who work healthcare fraud or who do our complex financial crimes, that's much more of an 8 to 5 job than it would be if you're working something like crimes against children. So it depends, but it really is, could be a smattering of any of those things.
I guess I would love for you to share. One question about that. Do you travel then with your work?
Yes, we can. We cover here in Michigan, our Detroit field office is where we work, but we cover the whole state. So we could be, working in Ann Arbor today, but up in the UP this evening. So we would cover that. We sometimes will have to travel to a different state to interview a victim or to a subject or to pick somebody up. We also have offices overseas. And so there's the opportunity to work overseas or to travel over there if you have, a subject or something overseas as well. So there can be a great deal of travel if that's something that interests you.
And for some people, it's that life-family balance, and that may be a deterrent, but for other people, it's very much quality.
Yes, yes.
So when you think about your last 15 years specifically in your career path, what has been really the most rewarding part of this work that makes you say you love it, and maybe some of the stuff that you don't like so much?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with what's hardest for me is, I don't know if you could tell by my educational choices, but I am a person who likes structure and routine. This is not a job for that. And so it is, sometimes we can plan a day, right? And so, today my day went very much to plan so far. But that could be derailed by any number of things that happen later on. And so that was hard for me to adjust to because I am a person who sort of likes to be able to plan and, has a list of things I'd like to get accomplished in a day. So I had to learn how to get over that. And that was hard for me. So that was complicated. I think the most rewarding part of this job, the most rewarding moment for me was when one of our victims that we had tried very, very hard to sort of get her out of her situation, finally graduated from high school. And it was such a thrill for me because she came from terrible circumstances. She had been a victim of some pretty horrific crimes. She'd been arrested by the locals, right? And so there was just a lot working against her. And she graduated from high school, and I was so proud because we don't often get to see those successes, particularly from our very young victims who've been through a lot of trauma. And for her to have made it through was such a joy. And, the opportunity to assist victims to recover as much as they can is really such a privilege of this job. And so it's the thing I appreciate most about being an agent.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it really shows some of your values too. And that you want to serve people. Is that what you would say as a value to be a federal agent?
Absolutely. And, I mentioned briefly, I come from a long line of military members in my history. And the military was not my choice. I'd grown up in it, and I wanted something different. But what I found as I was working as an adult was that I still wanted to serve in a way. And this is how I've been able to do it. And it really has, our former director used to call it having a career with moral content. And it really is. So, you get to do the things you've trained to do as a lawyer, as an accountant, as a computer scientist, but you get to do that in the service of others. And I think that has really been special. It's a special part of this job.
Yeah, we're grateful for your service for sure. So one of the little secrets that I would make sure counselors know about, or young people who are watching this, is like governmentjobs.com or FBIjobs.gov. Let's talk about that, because I think it's a great tool that they can get in and research around the different types of federal jobs, because we have different kind of branches, I guess, and maybe some of the requirements. So what would you like to share about that?
Yeah, so the FBI has their own jobs site, so it is FBIjobs.gov. But we also, all of the federal agencies, if you go to the Secret Service website, if you go to the ATF website, you will see, where you can go to apply to jobs. And what I think is great about this is that there it is, USA Jobs. So you won't necessarily find, or they will direct you to FBI Jobs if there are bureau positions on there. But it does give you an idea of what those requirements, educational or experience-wise, are going to be for each of those jobs. And so you can kind of, click around in there and see what's of interest to you. And that'll give you an idea of if as a young person you're thinking, I might never want to carry a gun, right? Like I don't like weapons, or I really do. I'd like to join SWAT and, be that kind of tactical person. What those requirements are for you as you're thinking about what you study in school, or how you adapt the career you've chosen to be a successful applicant for the Bureau.
Yeah, yes. And you bring up a good point that I want to catch before we finish up, that there are some federal law enforcement jobs involved that don't carry a gun. I guess I would never have thought that. And
yeah,
you mentioned
so many.
A certain percentage of the agents even carry 14,000, you said, out of that whole 36,000. So that's fantastic. Young people do want to know, though, have you ever shot anyone?
Fortunately, no. And I think federal law enforcement generally, with the exception of maybe our marshals who are always catching fugitives, don't get into as many shootings as our local and state partners do. But we train for that, right? That's unfortunately a hazard of the job. We just are fortunate I am very fortunate personally to never have had to shoot at someone. So
yeah,
excited.
I'm glad for you too. That half hour went really fast, Mara.
It did.
Final word of wisdom. Final word of wisdom.
Final words of wisdom. What I will say, and we talked about it, all education is good education, right? And so even if you don't end up using your engineering degree to be an engineer, the way that you learn to think and the way that you learn to enjoy puzzles and solving things will be useful for you going forward. And so if you find yourself like me, midway through your 30s, looking for a different career path, you've done nothing wrong. You've evolved to be the person you were meant to be all along. And so don't be discouraged by those bumps along the way. It will work out as it should.
Absolutely. You've been a wonderful role model to really hit that home. I just absolutely love that you can make those adjustments in your career. Lots of love coming through that chat. Everybody's so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
It was absolutely my pleasure. And thank you all for being here. And thank you for inviting me. Truly.